What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the Fighting Game Tutorial Series, we're going to be going over the Store, in-game Store widget, Part 5. And so this time we will be able to navigate up and down on our rows in our Store widget. So as I change categories, I can go between the category buttons, and I can go between the actual items in the store. As we navigate through the items in the store, the text down below the items for the name of the item and the description of the item populates, and I can also move up and down the rows freely. So I can have full navigation for my widget and actually visualize and use everything that we see in here. Instead of just moving up and down on the top row or left and right on the top row, we can actually move between all possible options in the store. This is the final navigational episode that we'll need to cover for the Store widget. After this, it'll be all about actually buying or purchasing objects with in-game currency or some other method. So our hard work is about to pay off. Now, before we hop into this episode, if you want to get caught up in the series, you can click this icon in the top right corner right here. This will lead you to the playlist for the fighting game. I believe we're on episode 177, so you can get caught up with all the work that we've done, everything that we've used and made to get to this point, and it's just a really fun journey. Alternatively, if you only care about the in-game Store widget, then you can click this icon right here to go to the first episode. This is part 5 of the in-game store, and we're going to be building off of all the logic from previous episodes, so it is very much recommended that you watch that one first. With that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. All we need today is our Store widget. So have my Store widget blueprint. That is the main Store widget. We have a few widgets related to them, such as the individual rows and items, but we only need the main widget today. The first thing we want to do is go to the graph and open up the function that we call at the end of our event graph called determine number of items in each category. So we had made this function to determine how many items were for characters, stages, our game settings, and our outfits. That way we knew how many items to populate and how many items the player could navigate through. However, we put a maximum amount of items in each row and then created additional rows after that to fill out the entire Store widget. At this point, we want to navigate between the category boxes and the items. So before, we were already at the first index of the items when we came into the store. However, we actually want to make sure that we can navigate to the items in the store, but then also back to the categories themselves. So we need an additional selection that we can choose here, which is our category buttons. This basically counts as an independent row. We always have this row for all of our categories, but then we also have all the elements in our vertical box and each individual horizontal box, or essentially our store rows. Long story short, we need to make sure that all of our max selections in each row, every single element in this array, has one more added to it. That way we can factor in the categories and we can actually navigate to that category section of the menu. And the main reason we want to do this is because before in the series, when we were pressing the up and down keys, we were automatically going between these categories on the left-hand side. But the problem is, since we can go up and down in the individual items of the store now, we don't want to be changing the category as well. That would be weird. So say I'm on the mannequin and I press down to go to this element right here. Before, I would have been on the stages element. I don't want to be changing both the category and the individual items on the widget. I only want to change either the category or the individual items. So, after the initial loop completes and we grab all of the values for the character, stage, outfit, and setting selections, we were setting each array element in this max selections in each category. Now you can see I've added a simple change where we add 1 to each of these local variables. So simply put, we take each of our selections, such as num character selections, we can drag off of it, press the plus sign, and do integer plus integer, with the other value as 1. Just add 1 to these variables and then set that to the item at this index. Not just num character selections, but num character selections plus 1. And so I've already put them all here, but I'm going to move them up into place. And there we go. So this is what determined number of items in each category should look like. Now, once we make this change, it is going to throw off our move selection a little bit. And move selection is going to be where the majority of our logic is today. So there's a lot of ugly logic in here. As usual, I will be adding this in and putting it in the proper spot as we go through this function. Let's start to go through it now so we can get this function cleaned up. So in our move selection, we were checking if we were moving horizontally or not. In the case that we were moving horizontally, we need to update our logic to not only factor in how many selections each category could have, but also how many elements are in each row. So in the case of our store, for my characters, I have the mannequin, the mutant, and 3 of these like random or hidden boxes right now. So before we were just using our max selections in each row and determining if we could actually navigate to it if there were enough selections. But since there are multiple rows now, there's technically 6 characters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if we allowed that max selections in each row to actually use all of those for horizontal movement, when we got to our final row here, which is the 5th character in the characters category, if we pressed right again, we would actually lose the border and we would technically be at the 6th element. You wouldn't see anything because our logic didn't account for it, but you would see that the border went away and that we were on some miscellaneous object. We also don't want this because A, the player can't buy anything at this location, but also B, the player could get stuck at that spot on the menu and we don't want that either. So not only do we have to take into account the category array and the category section here, but we also have to make sure that we don't have too many options and we can't navigate through them all on the horizontal row, because if we have even more than enough elements to fill one row, then we'll run into this bug if we don't make this change. Now you can see as many times as I press right, I stay on the rightmost element. And you know this is the case, not only because the border is not going away, but if I press left one time, I'm going to go over to the left. If I had gone too far over, I would have to press left multiple times to make it back to one of the widgets in the first row here. So instead of using max selections in each category and grabbing them at the current row, I'm doing this. This was plugged into this less than statement, so we were checking to see if the current selection in the row was less than the max selections of the current row. But we can actually get rid of that logic now and replace it with this logic here. And the logic we want to put in here is going to be determining how many elements there are in the current row we're at, then adding 1 to it for the category. So we are going to grab our item vertical box, which is the main vertical box where we store all of our actual store items. And so we have item vertical box, and we can get the child at our current horizontal box. And so we go to current horizontal box, get it, and pass that in as the index. Remember that index 0 is the top row, index 1 is the second row, and so on and so forth. So if we get the current horizontal box, or basically the current index that we're at, we will obtain the proper row that the player is currently navigating through. That way we can check to see how many elements this row has. And so if we drag off the return value, we have to cast it to the type of widget that it is, and it is a store row widget. All of the widgets that our vertical box holds will be store row widgets. So we have our store row, and from there we want to drag off that and get the row parameter. If you don't remember, this is our horizontal box parameter in the store row widget. So here's my store row, and it just has a horizontal box that is called row. It is that simple. So we're grabbing that, and we're getting the children count. So we're going to get all children of this. So in the case of characters, the widget has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 children. However, we have 6 characters on the screen currently. So we don't want to be able to navigate through all 6 characters by pressing left and right. We only want to be able to navigate through the first 5. And so the children count will be 5. However, that's not quite good enough because we also need to be able to navigate back to the characters button. So we have the characters button, then we have 2, the mannequin, 3, the mutant, 4, this question mark, 5, this question mark, and 6, this question mark. So we need to add 1 to the children count to get the true number of elements we can navigate between when using horizontal movement. That's what we have here. And once we do this, we want to actually take the result of the addition and plug that into the less than sign. So current selection in row plus the direction is less than this. We can now remove this old logic. And when we do that, I'm going to clean this up so that it is a little bit more visually appealing and we can understand it more easily. And this is our new logic where we get the appropriate child count. Then we check it against the same things that we were checking before to make sure that we're in the bounds, not below the minimum and not above the maximum elements that we want to navigate between. Assuming we are not, we actually navigate there. Then we highlight the proper button. We check to see if the button that we return is valid. If it is not valid, this means one of 2 things. We are either in a spot we should not be in, or more likely we are on one of the category buttons, which is not an item button. Now, navigating to a category button would trigger this because we have these functions called determine item button to focus and determine category button to focus. They are different. Not only are they in different widgets, like the categories are in a category vertical box and the individual items are in a item vertical box, but they are also different elements themselves. So whereas the categories are simply buttons, the items inside the store have their own widget called Store Item. So, determine category button to focus would have a category that it could highlight, but determine item button to focus wouldn't. It's looking for a specific category button, and it won't find it. So it will fail if we're on a category button and we're looking for an item in the store to focus and highlight. If this is the case, we just want to hide our data so that we are not displaying it to the user, because at this point we want to be on the categories, so we want to hide the border around any items in the store. And I'm also getting rid of the name and the description. You see when I scroll over to the categories, that stuff disappears. So if it's not valid, we're most likely on a category, in which case I want to reset my current horizontal box. And the reason I'm doing this is so that whenever I return to a category, I automatically start back at the top of the item list in the store. So for example, if I go down to the second row of the characters section of the store, when I press left, I still go back to the categories section and I'm on my characters category. When I press right, I want to pop back out of the mannequin. I don't want to retain where I was before and start back on this question mark. I want to go back to the mannequin. So by resetting the current horizontal box here, we will automatically start back up at the top when we exit the category and start navigating through the individual items in the store. Additionally, if we're on a category, or if we are in an incorrect spot on the store, we don't want to display text or the description of the item since we're not really hovering over an item. So before is not valid wasn't going to anything, but now it's resetting the current horizontal box, and we're also going to take the name text and the description text on this widget, which are these 2 text boxes, and we are going to call set text on them, but we're not going to pass anything in. It's just going to be blank. So you can either copy these nodes from below or just grab name text, get it, call set text with text in parentheses, and just leave it blank. And then do the same thing for description text. Once we're here, we want to go and still call display hovered item option. Display hovered item option is what draws the border in the correct spot. And at this point, we want the border gone because we're not at any of the individual store items, or we're in an incorrect spot, in which case we don't want to be displaying a border. So hiding it is a good option. Then this goes into our sound effects, which we still want to play because the player did move their selection on the menu. Now going back to the store to move selection, we have an alternative route right at the very first node. So if the movement is not horizontal, meaning it is vertical, we were doing some logic here to determine where we were at in the categories and to change between the categories. But we have a little bit of extra logic we have to account for now. So you can see if the movement is vertical, or basically if is horizontal movement is false, we now are going to go into a different branch. Remember that we are assuming that the category is index 0 in the row, and then we have all the individual elements in the row that are tied to each individual store item. So now we must determine if we're on a category or if we're on a store item. And that's how we're going to tell if we should navigate vertically through another store item or if we should navigate vertically through the categories. So remember, current selection in row is our horizontal movement. If you look right here, that is what we were setting when we were moving horizontally. So if current selection row is less than or equal to 0, that is the categories. We're not on the store items. So we know that we can navigate through the categories. This is what we were doing before no matter what. We didn't have a way to navigate through the store items. So this doesn't have to change. This is still accurate. However, current selection in row is not less than or equal to 0. That means we want to navigate through each individual store item. And to do that is all new logic that we have to add. We don't have any of this in here before this episode. This is all new. So I'm going to move this branch in here and clean it up a little bit so it's a little bit easier to read. Something like this should do the trick. So now if it's vertical movement, we go to this branch, and if we are not at the initial selection or index 0 in the row, then we take the false and we go here. That got disconnected, so be careful about that. Make sure nothing gets disconnected like it did for me. Almost caused some problems. But now continuing on to this logic. So we have to make sure that when we are moving to a lower value, we are above the minimum. And when we are moving to a higher value, we are below the maximum. And to do this, we can think of the current horizontal box as the row that we are on in the vertical box. So for example, go to our store and go to stages. We can think of this as row index 0 and this one as row index 1. Well, if we're at 0 and we try and go up, we don't want to be able to go up any higher. We're at the minimum value. But if we're at 1 and we try and go down, we don't want to be able to go down any lower. We're at the maximum value. So we have to keep our movement within that range. So the current horizontal box is where we are currently at in that, and we're adding the direction to it, just like we do for our other movements. So if our direction is down, or a +1, then we know we're moving down. If our direction is up, which is -1, then we know we're moving up. And so we check to see if the current horizontal box is greater than the minimum, which is -1. And it's got to be less than the maximum. The maximum here now is the item vertical boxes get children count, because all the horizontal boxes, all the store row widgets get added to the item vertical box. So we grab item VB, get children count, and we have to make sure that the current horizontal box plus the direction is less than this. If both these conditions are met, we can actually move vertically through the store items. So this branch doesn't do anything on false, but if it's true, we set the current horizontal box to be the current horizontal box plus the direction. At this point, we need to see if we can actually be where we're at in the row as well, because when we move up and down between store items, the rows might not be even. In the case of the characters, we have 5 elements in the first row, but we only have 1 element in the second row. So if I press down while I'm on the 5th element, I should make sure that I go to the first element of the second row, or basically the last element that I have available to me. So if I go to stages, there are 3 elements in the bottom row and 5 on the first. So if I'm on the 4th element, I should go to the closest element on the next row, which is element 3. If I'm on the 5th element, the same rule applies. If I'm on the 3rd element, the same rule applies. But less than that, I should be able to move freely. So to determine if we actually can move to the same index on the next row, we can grab our item vertical box using the current horizontal box as the index. We can get that child. So item VB, get child at, and you can either use your current horizontal box that you just set here, or actually grab the variable again like I did. Either way works. Then you can drag off your get child at. Remember, all our children are going to be store rows, so we're going to cast the store row. And now we have our variable type. Assuming this cast succeeds, we can grab the row horizontal box off of the store row. From here, we can get how many children there are off of the horizontal box by typing get children count. And now we know how many children are in here. Well, we have a max elements in row of 5. So if it's full, it would be 5, but we don't know that it's going to be full. So what we should do is check to see if the children count is less than the current selection in the row. The current selection in the row, when navigating between rows, is trying to remain the same. So if we're on element 4 here, the current selection in the row is actually 4. Technically, the mannequin would be index 0, the mutant would be index 1, the question mark here would be index 2, and this question mark would be index 3. But remember that we're counting the categories in here now as well. The category button for characters is actually index 0, the mannequin is index 1, the mutant is index 2, this question mark is index 3, and this question mark is index 4. Well, in the second row, we do have the character button, the character category button, but that's index 0, and then we only have this question mark, which is index 2. So we physically cannot go to index 4 of the second row. Thus, the children count is in fact less than the current selection in the row. If we bring this into a branch and say yes, true, meaning it is less than the current selection in the row, we can set the current selection in the row to be the maximum. And we know it's the maximum because we can get the children count, and whatever the count is, that's the highest value in the row we can go to. Again, using the character example. At this point, this is index 1. Characters is index 0. This is index 1. So current selection in row is going to now be 1 because we set it to how many children there are in the row horizontal box. Now, that's what we've done here. If the branch returns false, this means that the current selection row is at least matched by how many children are in the store row widget. So you have enough to go to that row and remain on the same horizontal item. And so we don't have to update current selection row. So if it's false, we just pass it along. But if it's true, we reset current selection in row to be the children count, like I mentioned, and then we go about our business. At this point, we want to do what we do in the horizontal box. It's a little bit different, but we still want to call determine item button to focus. Remember, determine item button to focus is how we know what actual widget or item we're hovering over. This doesn't add the border or anything, but it quite literally determines where we are going to be, what we're navigating to, so we know what information to update or use. At this point, we may have navigated vertically, but we're still navigating between the items, so we do want to call this. And then once we do, we can check for validity, and as long as it's a valid object, we can set the text to be the text from the store item reference that returns from the determine item button to focus function. Again, this is the same as we were doing above. We have the determine item button to focus. We have our name and description, convert them to text from strings. And then we call set text on the name and description text widgets that we have on the front here. And we're doing all of that here. You'll notice I don't have an is not valid here. It's a little bit different because the only way we can achieve is not valid is if we go out of bounds, which we shouldn't be letting happen. But just in case you do, I would recommend that you add the same sort of thing that we did above. And this is just a safeguard, so we will hide the border, we will empty out the text and description, and then we will also still play the sound effect. Regardless if it's valid or not, we want to call our display hovered item option, passing in the result we get from store item reference. This is what actually displays the border, or in the case of is not valid, hides the border. Then they both go to play the sound effect, which I'm going to clean up again. And there we go. Now, move selection is finished at this point. We would be able to freely move around, but we're not quite done yet because we have to update a few of our functions, specifically our determine item button to focus and our display hovered item option. So let's take a quick look. Let's move everything over and let's go to determine item button to focus. Now in here, almost everything is exactly the same as it was. Only update is that we have to subtract 1 from the current selection in row when we're using it to obtain the current child we're at in the store rows horizontal box. And the reason we're doing this is because of the additions we did earlier in the determined number of items in each category. Since we were arbitrarily adding 1 to account for the category boxes in the widget, we need to make sure that we are subtracting 1 when navigating through only the items because we don't want to take into account the category buttons. If we do, we'll be trying to cast to the wrong type, in which case we will fail and we won't be able to properly navigate. Or we'll have an additional option that we can navigate to that isn't really there. So simply put, when we're casting to the store item icon, that object that we are grabbing to do that, we just need to make sure that instead of using current selection in row, we're using current selection in row -1. And that small change will update it to do exactly what we need. Now, going back to move selection, we were also calling display hovered item option. We need to go into this function as well. In this function, we were clearing our old options as well as updating our border for the new option that we are hovering by looking at the item vertical box at the current row. But since we're moving vertically now, we're moving up and down between rows. So we either need to check the current row and the row we've moved to, or all rows. This is efficient enough that I'd recommend just checking all rows because it's much easier and it'll save us some trouble in the future. So instead of using item vertical box to get child at current horizontal box, what we really want to do is grab the item vertical box and get all children. So I'm going to move this in here to clean it up like I usually do. And so item vertical box, we can remove these other 2 nodes. We're going to call get all children instead. And then we're going to loop through the children instead of using that individual index and do the same logic otherwise. So again, we are going to grab our item vertical box, get all children, do a for each loop off of this array, then take the array element and pass that into the cast to store row that we had that was previously coming from the get child at index node. Now we will clear and check for all rows when setting our new currently navigated to item, which is good, definitely something we want to do. And at this point we can actually navigate through all of our objects safe and sound. There is an additional thing I'd like to show you that's very quick. So when we press the confirm button, we call our confirm selection function. When we do this, right now, we're only ever calling determine category button to focus. We will cover all the data, all the logic about the confirm button and confirming an individual item and what happens if we're not on the category, but we haven't done that yet. For the time being, when we select a new category, you may want to automatically move the player to the first element in the store item list. If you do want to do that, I would recommend that you go into your change category function, and at the very start where we are resetting some of our values like the current elements in row and the current horizontal box, you could reset the current selection in row as well, and you could reset it to index 1. If you do this, when you come into the store and you make selections, it will automatically put you on the first index of the items in that selection. So for example, when I select the characters category, I automatically end up on the mannequin. When I select the stages category, I automatically end up in the training area. Of course, you need at least one item for this to work, otherwise you will be out in limbo, like for my outfits and skins and game settings. So it is up to you if you want to do that. Otherwise, if you don't do this and just leave it alone, then you'll see it's doing what you saw the rest of the episode, which is where I start on the categories, I can press the button, I go to the next category, but I'm never over on the items in the store item list until I manually move there. That is personal preference, so feel free to play around with that if you like. I'm going to leave it out so that I have to manually navigate over to the store items. But with all that said, guys, we have a fully working store in terms of navigation. Now we will be going over how we can actually purchase things or unlock things and in-game currency so that we can actually buy things and not just unlock them. You know, not everything's free. We might have to play for it. We might have to earn currency by winning matches or completing challenges, whatever it may be. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. That's more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do. I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for all the love and support and for making this series possible. Really grateful to you guys. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I would be happy to help you and get you sorted so you can keep working on your game. So like I said, thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.